There is, in the finite view, this belief that consciousness is contained within the brain, which is contained within the body. And I think what you've helped people do in a very demonstrable way in this book is to see clearly that that's not the case. And one of the ways you can see that that's not a case is that, can you find a boundary?
Yeah.
Because I submit to you that if you can find a boundary, then I want you to report to me what's beyond the boundary. And if you can report to me what's beyond the boundary, you haven't found a boundary. You're still aware of it.
That's exactly right. You cannot change that. That cannot be changed.
Right.
That's the way life is. That's the deal, so to speak. Not, you know,
Right.
what I mean.
And the only place that we've ever been able to find this is right here and right now,
Yeah.
which is the only thing that we've ever experienced.
Yeah, yeah. And just to piggyback that a little bit, what we tend to do at first, and this will drive home a point, I think, of where the book and this whole perspective is coming from, is we will start out, because it seems that's how we're conditioned, we start out with this seeming relative world, or the finite world, where, as we said yesterday, things have a finish to them, a beginning and end. Everything is observable and measurable and has limits, has boundaries. This is the realm of boundaries, what appears to be right here. And then we'll say, yes, there's this boundless realm. Yeah, that's consciousness too.
Right.
And we'll kind of leave it there.
That's correct.
And
that's the entire point of this interview.
Yeah.
Is we'll say it's boundless. We can say, yes, consciousness exists outside of time and space, but do we ever really investigate it?
Yes. And what's the difference between saying what we've just said, that there's the finite, and the finite wakes up or looks out beyond itself somehow, finally, and there's this realization, my gosh, consciousness is boundless. But it's as if you still have started from the finite. And I admit it seems that way. It seems that way. But what happens when one starts as boundlessness? That's the starting point. Not from infinity looking up to boundlessness, but starting as boundlessness, which sees only boundlessness.
This is the key of your book.
That's the difference. That's where this is coming from.
This is what makes your book unique. This is what's different about what you're doing, and this, I think, is very important for people to hear.
Yeah.
Because it made a huge impact on me. Every time a question comes from this imagined finite source, it is guaranteed and certified to end with more confusion and no answer. There's no way a finite thing can understand infinity.
Yeah.
If you start as what you are, as consciousness, and look at the whole situation as that boundless thing that you are, I believe, as happened to me while working with your book, and to others, obviously, that things fall into place. Things start to make sense.
Yeah, they do. Right.
It's
that's exactly what happens.
that things start to
That's
make
right.
sense.
And this is not just some guy who came up with a clever point. You know, nobody's written a book this way. This is a clever way to sell some books. I'll just say it a little differently. The fact is, the natural fact, they talk about the natural state, this is what's true of consciousness itself. Right. Again, come back to the premise. It's the one being conscious here. It's its consciousness, and doggone it, it is starting as boundlessness.
Okay. I want to stop you right here, because this is a place where people are hearing you and may not be following you.
Okay.
You see, because it's very easy for someone to say, oh, okay, I'm consciousness. Me, I'm consciousness, my consciousness. And you are very careful, you're being very careful here. Every time you talk about consciousness, you say, consciousness, that is what it is experiencing. It is conscious. Not you.
Yeah.
It.
Yes.
Okay? Now coming back to this boundary and boundless issue that I just touched upon, which is only one way of looking through the prism, but that you brought up, if there is no boundary, how could there be my consciousness?
Exactly. Exactly. Beautifully said. That's it. Yeah. Where does the divine end and yours begin?
As this infinite thing, can't we then examine those things that we say are me from the position of infinity and say to ourselves, oh, that's not really me, I'm witnessing this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay?
That's right.
That's just more of the illusion, it's more of the dream,
Yeah.
it's more of this
Yeah.
substance that's coming up that we're going to say as absolute consciousness never did appear.
Yeah, and if this, I know we've all experienced seemingly when some of these things first start to dawn, and what we thought we were starts to dissolve. It can be a little unsettling at first, maybe. And I always say, hey, step off onto, if you will, the platform, the solid, rock solid, ain't going anywhere platform of boundless consciousness, which is, one thing I didn't say earlier is that another thing is the fact that consciousness is boundless, and even what appears as a stellar universe is not outside of consciousness. And what that means is that consciousness is not surrounded by space. Now, the entirety of existence is this immovable, changeless. If that ain't solid, the Rock of Gibraltar is like a piece of dust in comparison. Mm-hmm. It's just boom. And this is you. Not in a personal way, but this is you, and never, ever, ever, ever is it going to change or go away. It can't. It's all. Where could it go? So if it feels like something's a little shaky, step off onto the platform that you already are, really. Right. Drop the assumptions, and you will rest very solidly, so to speak.
Yeah. I keep circling back around because it's relevant to this hearing of it. Consciousness outside of time and space. You just said, is consciousness wrapped by space? If you're outside of time, how could there be a thought?
Yeah, it takes time to have a thought.
Now, you talked about something. I just want you to do it just real quickly.
Sure.
Very powerful in your book. You talk about, let's look at time. Even a nanosecond. Let's look at a nanosecond. A nanosecond, we would all agree, is in time.
Yeah, of course. It's a real tiny sliver, but it's still time.
Right.
Yeah.
So, in a nanosecond, you would not be consciousness. We're talking about something which is outside of that. So, a thought can't even form.
No.
No motion can form.
No. Right.
Waves of light can exist.
No, exactly.
Motion cannot exist.
Exactly.
So before we jump to the conclusion that consciousness, of course, it's outside of time and space, we need to understand that we're saying consciousness, of course, I don't exist.
Say that again.
I don't exist as a body-mind.
Oh, yes,
and that the world, literally,
yeah,
from the point of view of consciousness, could not possibly exist.
Not in the way it appears. No.
Right.
No.
And when we're talking about space, we're not talking about outer space, or space filling the room, or space around your body, or within your body, or the space between atoms, or the space between quarks.
No, that's right.
We're talking about a space which exists outside of dimension.
Yeah. So even this is where the words fail, because then, because space, then, but then what else are you going to say?
Right,
How else are you going to say it?
Of course. So when we're talking about this, before we move on to the next parts of our conversation here, before we start talking about, okay, it's not the words, it's the space between the words.
Oh, yeah, yes.
What does that mean?
Yeah, that is that. Sometimes it's called emptiness. It's the the words seem to come out in a flow of time, and where there's no flow, the stillness, the openness, and the words try to break the infinite into finite chunks. They try to separate it into. Another point, before I lose it, that I just think is important to make while we're right here, is as we were talking about infinity earlier in our other session, we tend to think infinity is, I can't remember if we spoke about the telescope or not. It's kind of like looking through both ends of it. Okay. And we'll tend to think that the finite is down here and it's limited and small, and then there's this big vast infinity. And when you start with infinity and look out from infinity, as we've been saying, infinity is it's like the reverse of when we look to the vastness of the infinite looks down on the smallness of us. It's like looking up to God, and we assume, the human mind assumes that what God sees is kind of the reverse direction of what the human sees when it looks up to God. It's an assumption, though, that God looks down and he sees the reverse picture. And we think that the infinite looks down, so to speak, or is much greater than the finite. No, 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 no. When starting from infinity, and by the way, that's what consciousness is, being the one presently conscious. That's it. There's only infinity, because the definition is no finity, no measurement, no limits, no time, because time would be a measurement. So how can one start with that and then say, it only goes so far, and then that's where time and space begins, and that's where finity begins, and that's where all of these limitations begin.
It would be limited.
It's so...
Infinity would have to be limited for that to be true.
And it would not be infinity. And it's so... And again, you never, ever, ever you're going to always doubt, argue, whatever, if you try to get this via thinking. You've got to be coming from awareness, as pure awareness. That's the only... As that between the words. Otherwise, it just won't be clear.